Emily Smith, welcome to 2020 Revision.
Thank you for having me.
That's quite all right. Now, you're a senior television producer for the ABC, but more importantly, you're a new mum in 2020. Now, I imagine becoming a new mum is daunting at the best of times, but during a global pandemic, as we can see, probably next level.
It's been crazy for journalists. This year is the biggest story probably of their careers, of their lives, and I've had the biggest career story and also the biggest event in my entire life happen in 2020. So it's been a wild ride.
So tell me about, I guess initially, the joy that comes with becoming pregnant for the first time and going through that, and then obviously everything you have to learn in the lead up to the birth. Then, coronavirus hits. Were you in a state of, what the hell? How do I deal with this extra spanner? Or were you just happy to roll with it?
I suppose I rolled with it because I had to, given what was going on in the world and what, as a TV producer, we needed to cover. And I think the people around me, excuse me, that's my little bub making some noises now. The people around me were really good at actually monitoring things a little bit better than I was. Okay, Bubby. But it was initially, and then there were a lot of little scary moments along the way because all of a sudden, no one obviously had a clue at the beginning of the year just how bad this could get, and who was vulnerable and who was not. And all of a sudden, I've been a healthy person, touch wood, luckily all my life, that you become in the vulnerable category. And a lot of people, medical professionals, can't really say definitively if you're going to be okay or not. So it was quite scary in just that sort of bigger extent. And obviously people just didn't have a clue what sort of impact the virus could have on pregnant people at the beginning of the year. So it's a bit
So were you guided by the medical professionals that you're working with? Were you doing, obviously with the brain that you have working in media and researching, were you doing a lot of that on the side? What was your approach to it all?
So I was speaking to, I had a great obstetrician, and I was speaking to her a fair bit, and also funnily enough, one of my oldest friends is an infectious diseases specialist, and which is very, very convenient. Also a mother of two, and when she specialised in this 6 years ago, I was like, that's what a random choice. But wow, has that paid off? So I was in touch with her a fair bit, and there were studies done, and which I was reading about, and I work with someone that is a journalist and an academic and incredible researcher. I was talking to her a fair bit about it as well. But the studies are based on 20 women in China. That's not exactly
a huge sample.
Exactly. So there were. I was reading and trying, but I'm really lucky. I have a wonderful team, and my management was really took care of me straight away. And I think ABC generally went into sort of safe mode pretty early in the picture. And I got a call on the Sunday afternoon, and we're talking plans. And then at the end of the conversation, it was like, well, obviously, Emily, as you stay home for now, and work from home because we can't tell what's going to happen. And then I never went back to the office. So that was March 15, and I never went back to the office, which was a really, really weird thing to sort of have this pregnancy without, sort of by myself, in a way, without colleagues or friends.
So in that situation, obviously you mentioned, what were the plans around maternity leave before you were, struck down by what was going to take over the world?
So I planned to sort of be off sometime mid-June. I was due early July, and obviously work right up until that. I manage a team. It's a hectic job. The senior members of my team all just happen to be women who have all had children, and was sort of said, you know, you might need to take it easy a little bit. It's hard pregnancy. But I had that kind of attitude going in. And then we obviously all had to change in mid-March. This was sort of as or before Scott Morrison sort of announced those major restrictions on like large crowds, etc. And we made some changes to our workplace. That's when it sort of became a bit serious, and that's when things really quite dramatically changed in terms of our planning, because I'm married to a school teacher, and they were kept at school for a long time, like all teachers, which caused us an enormous amount of stress. We were living with my you know, they don't say they're elderly, but my parents, they're elderly. So he's a school teacher living with two vulnerable sets of people, and they're elderly and are pregnant. And so he moved out. We hired a serviced apartment for a week or two while he figured things we figured things out, how we could actually operate in this environment. And that was in March. So when no one really had a clue. So it was all a bit weird and different in that sense.
I think different is probably understood massively. But what about things that I guess normal, for want of a better term, couples go through, like, you know, antenatal classes and you know, appointments with specialists and all of that? How did all of that go down in that period?
So I'm one of those people who have always been in my entire life, someone that leaves things to the last moment. So I kind of thought, like a lot of the, you know, how you learn to be a parent, how you learn to give birth. I'll do one of those weekend courses. I'll learn everything I know. All of our friends said how wonderful they were, and great. And that will be my prep for this. And of course, everything was cancelled.
Yep.
And that really kind of terrified me, because I was really relying on it. And everyone will know that's ever read anything to do with pregnancy or parenting. There's so much contradictory advice in books, and so they were doing my head in. So I really I'm a person that likes to hear from people, and that's how I learn. And so I was really everything was cancelled. My OB continued to have in-face consultations if we wanted to,
Yep.
which was really good. But so I still continued that, not with my husband, because there were restrictions on who was allowed in. And, you know, this is our first baby. So that was a bit sort of sad and disappointing and a little bit scary not to have him involved in those kind of conversations. And then actually, although right as we were making some quite important decisions, you know, just in the weeks before birth about whether we were going to be induced and for various reasons, my husband was allowed to take me to the appointment but not come in. So he stood in the hallway listening on the phone, and we were making this quite significant decision and having these quite significant like scans done and tests done, and all with him sort of like down the corridor. And it felt really strange and a little bit daunting and a little bit sad.
And like disconnected as well, I would imagine. Like, even though you're there by the phone, but I can't imagine not being in the I guess in the office without your partner. Like,
Absolutely, it's, you know, like I think I sort of we had sort of figured at the initial, you know, apart from like the main appointments, the big scans, he was going to come to all of those, but the early appointments I'd handle myself, because it's just, you know, there's a lot and it's quite a disruption.
Yep.
And then, you know, towards the business end of the pregnancy, that he would be a part of everything. And that was that was obviously not allowed. And I had some concerns, and I was getting very stressed and working very, very hard, as everyone was. And my husband was very concerned about my health. And so him not being able to be a part of those meetings, you know, he was having separate conversations with the obstetrician over the phone and stuff because he couldn't have that face-to-face contact to have those chats. Yeah.
Wow. So fast forwarding to the birth itself, were you in and the timeline around that? Was that during a lockdown period, or was that shortly after a lockdown period? Where were you at with all of that, and what was your feeling towards the frontline workers that were assisting you during the birth?
Well, I mean, they're incredible because these midwives and doctors are in risky environments, given that they work very much at a hospital. And what the hospital I gave birth in, that was a COVID testing site from early days. You know, like they were dealing with it from the very beginning. And we were actually, as it happens, we went in the night before because I got induced, and we were in this really large like theatre room that we were staying in, and they said, "Oh, this is our like COVID preparedness room." And I was like, "What does that mean?" Said, "Well, if any woman that came in, they hadn't had anyone, so that was July, so a number of months, but they hadn't had to experience it, thank goodness. But any woman that came in was going to give birth in this room." And they had enough supplies in there so they didn't have to go into other areas of the hospital, and they could just basically like throw it all away, sterilize, and start again if they needed to. So it was like this separate sort of environment that they had planned for just in case. But as it was in the lead up, and I think it was only about 6 weeks before, maybe about 7 weeks before, there was discussion that male partners or partners, male female partners couldn't be allowed in the delivery room with you, which was mind-blowing to me because I needed that. I needed someone as a support person, and thank goodness that was sort of over by the time I gave birth. It was a threat over, you know, that they could, if anything got bad, that they would obviously want to limit the number of people in the hospital, which is completely fair enough. But to not have your person, whoever your person is, there, that's terrifying.
Totally terrifying. Like, so what was your feeling around that? Obviously, then there was, I guess, a feeling of, okay, well, they will be here. That's great. And that sort of gave you that extra, I guess, support you needed throughout, you know, that period. So moving sort of on towards that, I mean, how did you sort of feel afterwards in terms of, okay, the support that you were getting? I mean, the visitation rights and all of those, that would have been totally different to what, again, using in inverted commas, normal people would have expected.
Absolutely. So they at that time, and for a long time, and maybe still in place, you couldn't have any visitors. So I was in hospital for 5 nights. So 4 nights with Bub, and my husband was allowed to stay that whole time. So that was excellent. And so we were in this bubble, and we were in a baby bubble, and everyone talks about it, but without any visitors, we were in a complete bubble. And we were sort of asked to stick to our room as much as possible, and only left if you had to. And I'm a very private person, so I actually loved it. I loved it. I felt it's so. If you've Ralph, you've had this joy twice. If anyone's had this joy, you are overwhelmed with emotions and feelings. It is the most intense emotional roller coaster, and it was actually lovely to just have some privacy to deal with those emotions, that craziness, that like unbelievable bursting love, but also, you know, everything's heightened. You think everything's funnier, everything's sadder, everything's lovelier. And it was quite nice to not have to like deal with visitors during that time. I know that's an awful thing to say.
That's one of the great delicate balances of becoming a new parent, is almost like as a male in that situation, you're almost like the gatekeeper, because people are genuine in their joy and they want to share what's just but there's also that fact of there's a new human that's just arrived. There's also a mother, as you mentioned, that's experiencing quite, uh,
Yeah.
hormones and everything that goes
Yeah.
with it. So you've kind of got to almost be rude to people and say, we're not seeing any visitors, and other people you're like, yeah, you can come, but only for 20 minutes. And like
Yeah.
that, you have that removed, I guess,
Oh,
your situation, as you mentioned, kind of like a little bit of a blessing, in a way.
it was. Like, obviously, I would have loved to have my mum there, because there's something really, really uniquely special about mums and daughters and giving birth and that. And I would have loved that. But at the same time, having that sort of just that privacy of the three of you. So it's just me, my husband, and my baby. It was so magical. It was so magical. And friends that had just been through it, I've got a lot of friends that have, got, 1-year-olds. I'd said, this is lovely. Like, enjoy it and just be in that bubble, shut down, and we'll speak to you when you're out of it. And that was very, very special. But that's actually the week that, so my husband's from Melbourne. And so all his family are there. And that was the week that they announced border closures. And my mother-in-law and my father-in-law obviously had planned to come up, as soon as they could. So the following week, or when we were out of hospital, and they couldn't, and they were devastated. And so we were dealing with a lot of people's emotions with that, like how to cope with that. My husband kept his feelings to himself, because I think he didn't think I could handle anymore.
I do.
Yes. But that was really, that was a crazy week, because Victoria was just going through all of this madness, and it just got, increasingly worse. And we were going to be separated from the grandparents, which was really sad. Sorry, we're teething here, Ralph. So we're in the middle of 4-month-old teething. And so that's what you're hearing, this little tears in the background.
The challenges as we So what about the other things that go along with, again, a normal upbringing of an infant, like mother's group? Did that exist for you? Like, how did all of that unfold as well?
Well, initially, the immediate weeks after were really challenging, because obviously we couldn't have as many visitors. We had to be very careful. So it was quite isolating the first few weeks after birth. I mean, I didn't mind it, because again, like, I'm kind of a person that just wanted to go through this experience a little bit privately for a moment, and then have friends. But for weeks, we didn't really see anyone, and it took a couple of weeks for me to be able to see my parents, which, that means also it's exhausting, because, as you know, we had no break. So we had a baby that wouldn't go down at all. So for weeks we were in this like shift pattern of being sitting up awake with Bubs, and doing all the other sort of things without that sort of village to support. So it was a bit, it was a bit of a challenge. And mother's group was, excuse me while I just move Bubs around. Mother's group was done like everything else this year virtually. And so we were sort of put together in our normal community centre groups, but we did ours over Zoom. So you're meeting 12 women and a nurse over Zoom. And it's so strange. You get 3 of these sessions, and, you're dealing with internet outages, babies crying. Like, it was a bit of a mess. But they did very well. It was a very odd feeling. And then you kind of, as it is with mothers groups, then they go, okay, off you go, and if you want to be friends, you be friends. But when you hadn't met anyone yet,
No.
how strange it was to then start up, conversations. And we started a WhatsApp group. And oh my God, it's actually been the most amazing experience of friendship, because we're strangers on a group. It's so 2020, talking about the most intimate, private things we hadn't even met before. And it took us obviously a while to meet. And there was nervousness around meeting people because I didn't know them. And obviously we're trying to be very COVID safe. And I know the extent that I go to be COVID safe, but you don't know these sort of strangers, and you're taking the most vulnerable person in your life to meet them. And it's a crazy experience. And I know friends that have gone through this year with babies and mothers groups, and they found that really challenging. I've been in this wonderful group of women who have really got me through this year and all those challenges, many of whom who are actually English, because I live in near Bondi, so there's a lot of English people. And where someone lovely said the other day, we're their village because they have no family here whatsoever. And so that's been really, really important to them to have this group of women, these strangers, who we discuss mostly things on WhatsApp. And in the last couple of months, we've just sort of slowly got together more and more and more in person, which is lovely.
One of the things that I guess most new parents notice when they first, are dealing with all of the situations is the time that it takes to pack the car. I can't imagine how much longer in a pandemic that takes, like with all of everything else that goes along with it. I was just like, it takes you a ridiculous amount of time to get out of the house. Is that what you experienced as well in these times?
Absolutely, because I'm I'm a neat, tidy, clean freak anyway. I drive my husband nuts and my friends nuts with it. Put a pandemic on top of that, and I'm cleaning surfaces at when we go out, because I just feel so unbelievably responsible. I'm not unique in this, but so unbelievably responsible for a tiny human. The amount of hand sanitizer that we have in every single bag, every single exit of the house, everything. Everything takes a lot more thought. Meeting up with people who you meet with, and what sort of where they've been and how they if their jobs sort of compromise them a bit. We take a lot of precautions because of my husband's job still. You can't socially distance children, so he's and he's teenagers, so they're young men that he's teaching. So we have protocols in place for when he comes home, how he washes and changes before he sees the bub. And we also let all of our friends know when we see them, all right, this is what's happened at Jimmy's school this week, if there's any concerns, or this is what we do. So people don't worry, because we realise that they're probably a bit nervous about being around him, because he doesn't have the option of working from home, and so has that sort of extra responsibility there. So there's a lot of thought that goes into this, but we have just been I don't want to sound like it's a bad thing, because we've just been so unbelievably lucky, this year with everything. So it's while there's a lot of thought, I don't know any other way. I had a few mothers tell me, say to me, oh, I don't know how this must be really hard to do this during a pandemic, but it's my first. I don't know any other way. So it was all hard. And I think that's just new parenting.
Well, I must say that you have done remarkably well during this chat to keep things under control. So if you can do that, I think you can. We'll wrap it up in a tick, but I just want to get your thoughts on what you're looking forward to most in 2021.
I really think that I'm looking forward to things sort of being a bit more relaxed, I suppose. And obviously we can't relax until we can relax. But just to be able to see friends and see family and be all together. And what's really exciting is now the borders have opened today as we speak. So we're going to see Remy, my little boy, is going to meet his grandparents in a couple of weeks, which is so...
Yep.
Yeah, first time. So that's so lovely. And to have those moments. My sister lives in Queensland, so we're still waiting for that moment. And I really
Come on,
just
Anna,
desperate.
get your act together.
Oh, I'm so desperate for it. I'm so desperate for it. So yeah, that I'm looking forward to more time with family. But I know 2020 has been just the worst year for a lot of people. But we are so unbelievably lucky that it's actually been the most joyful year for us. And I know we're just really grateful for that. And we just want to take that sort of gratitude into 2021 because we just very lucky.
Emily Smith, thanks very much for joining me on 2020 Revision.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.